Number 1. La Llorona, under the I-10 bridge, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I want you to listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you didn't happen in Mexico, or some remote village, or in an old legend passed down through generations. It happened right here, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, under the I-10 bridge, where the Mississippi River turns black after sunset, and I swear on everything I love, I heard La Llorona calling for her children. I was working the night shift back in 2022, driving deliveries between warehouses along River Road. I'd gotten used to pulling over near the river to rest for a few minutes before continuing my route. Most nights were quiet, just the hum of the interstate above me and the slow roll of the Mississippi. But that night, as soon as I stepped out of the truck, I heard crying. Not just regular crying. A woman's voice, shaky, breathless, broken. It echoed beneath the massive concrete supports of the bridge. At first, I thought it was someone hurt. The riverbank in that area has steep drops, slippery mud, and plenty of places to fall. People get stuck there sometimes. So I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the sound. But the closer I got, the colder the air felt, and the darker it got, darker than it should have been under all those bridge lights. The crying grew louder, desperate, like each breath was tearing her apart. Mis hijos, the voice cracked. ¿Dónde están mis hijos? Primera feroz? Because I knew those words. Everyone who grew up in a Latino household knows them. They're carved into our bones from childhood stories. Lalo, but I tried to shake it off. I told myself it had to be someone drunk, or high, or injured. I raised my flashlight and that's when I saw her standing ankle deep in the Mississippi. A woman in a long white dress, drenched and clinging to her skin. Her black hair hung straight down, soaked and tangled like riverweed. She wasn't facing me. She was staring into the rushing water. Trembling, I called out, "Ma'am, are you hurt?" She didn't answer, but the crying stopped instantly, like someone cut the sound out of the air. I stepped closer. "Ma'am, do you need help?" She slowly turned her head, not her body. Just her head, and looked at me. Her face, God, I'll never forget it. It wasn't rotten or monstrous. It was worse. It was empty. Her eyes were gone. Just two dark, wet hollows leaking river water down her cheeks and her mouth. It widened not like a scream, but like she was gasping for air after drowning. The river around her rippled even though nothing touched it. Then she whispered, "You have seen them, my children." Her voice sounded like it came from underwater. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get back in the truck, to leave her there on the riverbank, but I couldn't move. I felt something pulling me, not physically, but emotionally, like her grief was a hook tearing through my ribs. She took one step closer. The water didn't splash. She didn't sink. She just glided. I stumbled back and dropped the flashlight. It rolled into the mud, beam pointing up toward the bridge. I felt the river wind shift, whipping cold air across my face. And then she screamed. The scream was so sharp and so loud that I felt it inside my skull. Concrete vibrated. The river convulsed. My knees buckled. It was the scream of La Llorona. I scrambled toward the truck, slipping in the mud. I didn't dare look back. I didn't need to. Her screams echoed behind me, bouncing off the pillars, overlapping like multiple voices crying at once. When I finally yanked the door open, the dome light flickered. The radio turned on by itself, hissing with static. And under the static, Primera E-A-R-D-E-T, mis hijos. But this time, it sounded like she was inside the cab. I slammed the door, turned the key, and floored it. The tires spun in the mud before catching the pavement. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Not until I hit the brightly lit stretch of I-10 East. And when I finally looked at the passenger seat, there were wet footprints on the floor mat. Small ones. Children's footprints. I never went back to that spot again. Not even during the day. A week later, I overheard two older men from Baton Rouge talking outside a gas station on Highland Road. They mentioned the river, the bridge, the cries at night. So I walked up to them and asked, "Do people really hear things down there?" The older man with the LSU cap nodded slowly. "Son, La Llorona's been walking that river longer than any of us have been alive. People see her, hear her, some even follow her." He looked me dead in the eyes. "You're lucky you ran." To this day, I don't know why she singled me out. Why she turned her hollow eyes toward me. Why she asked me if I'd seen her children. But one thing is certain. La Llorona isn't just a story. She isn't just a warning told by grandparents. She's here, walking American rivers, just like she walked the ones back home. And if you ever hear a woman crying near the Mississippi after midnight, especially under that stretch of I-10, don't answer, don't look, and don't get close, because she's still out there, still searching, screaming, and she'll take anyone who listens. Number 5. La Llorona, beneath the Brooklyn Bridge, New York. The city never truly sleeps, does it? There's always a distant siren, the rumble of the subway deep beneath your feet, the low hum of a million lives stacked on top of each other. But sometimes, in the dead of night, another sound breaks through. A sound that doesn't belong. A sound that chills you right down to your bones. I was out under the Brooklyn Bridge at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The air was thick and damp, tasting of salt and old iron. I had a photography assignment due, long exposure shots of the skyline. The kind where the city lights smear into ribbons of gold and red, and the water of the East River turns to smooth, black glass. The bridge loomed over me, a massive, silent skeleton against the bruised purple of the night sky. It was quiet, unusually so, just the gentle lapping of the river against the pylons. And then, I heard it. At first it was so faint I thought it was just the wind whistling through the steel cables, but it grew louder, clearer. It was the sound of a woman crying. Not just sad crying, but a desperate, gut-wrenching sobbing that seemed to carry the weight of all the sorrow in the world. My first thought was that someone was in trouble. I lowered my camera and scanned the shoreline. The fog was rolling in thick off the river, blurring the edges of everything, and through that swirling mist, I saw her. A figure standing right at the waterline, her back to me. She was wearing a long, simple white dress that seemed almost to glow in the gloom. Her black hair hung down her back, long and straight, dripping as if she'd just climbed out of the river. She seemed to be searching for something, her head turning slowly from side to side, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I felt a pang of concern. "Hey," I called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" My voice sounded small and thin against the vastness of the night. She didn't respond. She just kept crying, her gaze fixed on the dark, swirling water. I took a hesitant step closer, my boots crunching on the gravelly shore. I raised my camera again, more out of instinct than anything else. A photographer's impulse to document, to capture the moment. I focused the lens on her reflection in the water. The river was surprisingly still right there, like a perfect mirror. In that reflection, I saw her face. It was beautiful, but contorted in agony. High cheekbones, dark eyes wide with a pain that felt ancient. Her lips were parted, a silent scream etched on her features. My blood ran cold. I slowly lifted my gaze from the reflection in the water to the woman herself. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, deafening silence. Where her face should have been, there was nothing, just a smooth, blank void. A featureless expanse of pale skin framed by that long, dark hair. It was like looking at a mannequin, but this was no mannequin. It was moving, it was weeping. The sobbing stopped, the air grew heavy, pressing in on me. A whisper slithered through the fog, a sound that wasn't carried by the wind but seemed to materialize directly inside my head. It was a single, mournful phrase, stretched out and full of longing. "Miss Hijos, my children." Every muscle in my body seized up. I was completely frozen, my fingers locked around my camera. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't scream. The camera in my hands went dead. The screen just blinked out. The red recording light vanished. My legs felt like they were encased in concrete. I was trapped, a statue on the riverbank, forced to witness this impossibility. Then, she turned slowly, gracefully. That blank, featureless head swiveled to face me, and she started to move toward me. She didn't walk. She glided. Her feet, which I could now see were bare, hovered an inch above the sharp stones and debris of the shore. She moved without a sound, a silent, gliding horror drifting out of the fog, her white dress trailing behind her like a burial shroud. That horrifying whisper echoed in my mind again, closer this time, louder. "Miss Hijos." I could feel the despair in that voice, a bottomless ocean of it. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. It was a demand. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My mind was a whirlwind of sheer, primal terror. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. This was something from a story my grandmother used to tell me to keep me away from the arroyo back home, La Llorona, the weeping woman. But this wasn't a dusty town in Mexico. This was New York City. This was the Brooklyn Bridge. She didn't belong here. She was getting closer. The cold radiating from her was a physical thing, seeping into my clothes, into my skin, making my teeth chatter. I could almost make out the texture of her dress, the way the damp fabric clung to a form that wasn't quite solid. And that face, that awful empty face, was the last thing I thought I would ever see. And then, a sudden, blinding light washed over everything. A roar of sound shattered the silence. It was a late-night delivery truck rumbling over the bridge above. The vibration shook the very ground I was standing on. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut against the sudden assault on my senses. The spell was broken. When I opened my eyes a second later, she was gone. The fog was still there, thick as ever, but the space where she had been was empty. The air was no longer cold. The oppressive silence was replaced by the familiar hum of the city. The crying had stopped. I stood there for a long time, shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I finally managed to look down at my camera. It was still dead. Later I'd find out the battery was fully charged, but the memory card was completely wiped, corrupted. Every photo from that night, and everything else on it, was gone. I stumbled away from the river, not even bothering to pack up my tripod. I just ran. I didn't stop running until the neon lights of a 24-hour bodega felt like a safe harbor. I never went back to get my tripod. I dropped the photography class. I told my professor my gear was stolen. How could I explain what really happened? That I met a legend under the Brooklyn Bridge? That I saw a ghost who had lost her children and was still searching for them, centuries later, thousands of miles from home? I don't know why she was there. Maybe sorrow like hers doesn't care about geography. Maybe a river is a river, and a mother's grief is a language that all water understands. All I know is that sometimes, when the city gets too quiet, I can still hear it. That faint, desolate sobbing on the edge of my hearing. And I know she's still out there, walking the banks of a river that isn't hers, forever searching in the dark. So if you ever walking by the East River late at night, and you hear a woman crying, don't go looking for her. Just turn around and walk away. Don't look into the water. And whatever you do, don't look up at her face. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you've had a similar encounter, or heard tales like this in your own city, I'd love to read about them in the comments below. And if you enjoy chilling true stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Stay safe out there. Number 3. La Llorona at the San Antonio Riverwalk, Texas. Have you ever been to the San Antonio Riverwalk? It's beautiful, right? Twinkling lights, music, people laughing, boats gliding on the water. It feels like a fairy tale. But what if I told you that beneath all that charm, a centuries-old horror story is playing out, right in front of unsuspecting tourists? What if you were the only one who saw it for what it truly was? I was in San Antonio for a conference a few years back. After a long day, I decided to take a late-night stroll along the river walk to clear my head. It was late, maybe around 1 in the morning. Most of the restaurants were closing up, and the crowds had thinned out. I found myself on a quieter, more secluded part of the path, away from the main tourist hubbub. The water was dark and still, reflecting the string lights hanging from the cypress trees. It was peaceful. And then I heard it, a sound that cut through the calm night air. It was a woman, crying. Not just sad crying, but a deep, gut-wrenching sob filled with a pain so raw it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I looked around, trying to find where it was coming from. My eyes scanned the opposite bank, the bridges, the darkened archways. Nothing. The sound seemed to be coming from the river itself. I walked closer to the water's edge, peering into the darkness. That's when I saw her. A figure in a long white dress. She wasn't on the bank, she was on the water. Or rather, just above it. Her feet weren't touching the surface. She was hovering, her body drifting slowly with the gentle current, her face buried in her hands as she wept. My first thought was, this has to be a trick. Some kind of special effect for a late-night tour? Or maybe a street performer with a really elaborate setup. It's San Antonio, after all. They love their theatrics. But the longer I watched, the more unsettled I became. There were no wires, no hidden platforms. Her movements were too fluid, too ethereal. The air around her felt cold, a stark contrast to the humid Texas night. My curiosity got the better of my fear. I took a few steps closer and called out softly, trying not to startle her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The sobbing stopped. Silence. For a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me. Then, she slowly lowered her hands and turned her head towards me. My blood ran cold. Where her eyes should have been, there were just 2 dark, empty sockets. It was like looking into a void. Her face was pale and gaunt, her long black hair tangled and wet, clinging to a face contorted by eternal grief. The white dress she wore was soaked and tattered, as if she'd been in that river for 100 years. And then she spoke. Her voice was a chilling whisper that seemed to echo from the depths of the water itself. It was just 2 words, but they were filled with an agony that shook me to my core. "Miss He-Ho's my children." Just as the words left her lips, one of the famous river barges, full of tourists, came around the bend. Laughter and music filled the air, shattering the terrifying silence. As the boat passed between us, a few people on board pointed at the weeping woman, and then they started clapping. They clapped and cheered. "Bravo!" Someone yelled. "What a great performance!" They thought she was part of the show, an actress hired to spook the late-night tour groups. They were laughing, taking pictures with their phones, completely oblivious. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them this was real, that this wasn't entertainment, but I was frozen. My eyes locked on the figure. She paid the boat no mind. Her hollow gaze was fixed on me. As the barge moved past, she let out one final, heart-stopping wail that seemed to silence everything: the music, the laughter, the city itself. And then, she was gone. She didn't fade away slowly. She didn't sink. One moment she was there, hovering over the water, and the next she had vanished. There was no splash, no ripple, not even a single disturbance on the surface of the river. It was as if she had never been there at all. The tour boat continued on its way, the sounds of merriment returning as it disappeared around the next bend. I was left alone in the sudden, heavy silence, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where she had been, my mind racing. Was it a hallucination? Was I just overtired? But the cold I felt, the sound of her voice, it was too real. I had heard the stories, of course. Growing up in the Southwest, you can't escape the legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman, the ghost of a mother who, in a fit of despair or rage, drowned her own children and is now cursed to search for them for eternity, weeping by the water's edge. They say if you hear her cry, it's a terrible omen. They say if she calls to you, she might mistake you for one of her lost children and pull you into a watery grave. I always thought it was just a spooky story told around campfires to scare kids. But that night, on the banks of the San Antonio River, I saw her. And the most terrifying part wasn't the empty eyes or the ghostly form. It was the fact that her genuine, eternal agony was mistaken for entertainment. That her tragic story was reduced to a tourist attraction, applauded by people who had no idea they were witnessing the real thing. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hollow sockets and heard that mournful cry, "Miss Heath." I left San Antonio the next day, and I've never been back to the Riverwalk at night. Sometimes, when I'm near water after dark, I still feel a chill run down my spine, and I can't help but listen for the sound of a woman crying. So if you ever find yourself walking along the San Antonio Riverwalk late at night, and you hear a woman weeping, don't just assume it's part of the show. And whatever you do, don't get too close. You might just become the next part of her tragic, endless search. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain at a famous landmark? Let me know your own stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this glimpse into the darker side of travel, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more strange tales. Thanks for watching. Number 2, La Llorona hitchhiked on Route 66, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Have you ever driven down a lonely road at night? That feeling of unease prickling the back of your neck? That feeling that you're not quite alone, even when the highway stretches empty for miles ahead? I used to dismiss those feelings. A trick of the light, an overactive imagination fueled by too much coffee. But one night, on a desolate stretch of Route 66 just outside Albuquerque, New Mexico, I learned that some feelings are warnings, and some legends are more than just stories told around a campfire. It was late, past midnight, the kind of dark where the sky and the asphalt blend into one. My headlights cut a lonely path through the New Mexico desert. I was tired, my eyes gritty from hours on the road, just wanting to reach my hotel. That's when I saw her. A figure on the side of the road, illuminated by my high beams. A woman. She was standing there, waving her arm frantically, almost desperately. As I got closer, I saw she was wearing a long, simple white dress, and she was completely, utterly drenched, as if she'd just climbed out of a river. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and even from inside my car, I could see she was shivering uncontrollably. Now, I know what you're thinking. Picking up a hitchhiker in the middle of the night on a deserted highway. It's the opening scene to a dozen horror movies. Every rational part of my brain screamed to keep driving, lock the doors, and not look back. But she looked so vulnerable, so distressed. The rain wasn't just a drizzle, it was a downpour that had started out of nowhere just moments before. I slowed the car, my conscience getting the better of my fear. I rolled down the passenger window just a crack. The air that rushed in was cold and damp, smelling of rain and wet earth. "Are you okay, ma'am? Do you need help?" I shouted over the drumming of the rain on my car roof. She didn't look at me directly. Her head was bowed, her face hidden by that curtain of wet, black hair. She just nodded, her shoulders shaking. I lost my boys," she whispered. Her voice was thin, fragile, and filled with a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight in the air. "I can't find them." My heart broke for her. A mother lost, separated from her children in this storm. All my reservations vanished. I couldn't just leave her here. "Get in," I said, leaning over to unlock the back door. "I can take you to the next town. We'll call the police. We'll find them." She opened the back door and slid onto the seat behind me. A blast of cold, damp air filled the car. I could hear the squelch of the wet fabric against the leather. I pulled back onto the highway, my eyes scanning the road ahead, half expecting to see two small figures wandering in the dark. "Where did you last see them?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. But she wasn't looking at me. She was staring out the back window, into the darkness we were leaving behind. She just kept whispering, over and over, like a prayer, "Mis hijos, my boys." The silence in the car grew heavy, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and her soft, heartbreaking whispers. I tried to make small talk, to offer some comfort. "Don't worry, we'll find them. Kids are resilient. They probably found a place to shelter from the rain." She didn't respond. It was like she was in her own world, a world of grief. A few miles passed. The rain began to let up, slowing to a light drizzle. I decided to check on her again. I adjusted my rearview mirror, and my blood ran cold. The back seat was empty. She was gone, vanished. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching on the wet pavement as the car swerved to a halt. My heart was a drum against my ribs. How could she be gone? The doors were locked. I hadn't heard a thing. It was impossible. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe she jumped out, but I would have heard the door, felt the car shift. Maybe I was just tired, hallucinating. But the evidence was right there. The back seat where she had been sitting was soaked. A dark wet patch in the shape of a person, water beaded on the leather, and a small puddle was forming on the floor mat. I could smell the damp, river-like scent clinging to the air inside my car. She was real. She had been here. I got out of the car, my legs trembling. The night was eerily quiet now that the rain had stopped. The air was thick and humid. I stood there in the middle of the empty highway, the red of my taillights painting the wet asphalt. I was trying to process what had just happened. Was I losing my mind? And then I saw her. Further up the road, caught in the white glare of my own headlights, was a figure. It was her, the woman in the white dress. She was walking slowly, aimlessly, in the center of the highway, her back to me. How did she get out of the car and get so far ahead of me so quickly? It didn't make any sense. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Wait," she stopped. For a long moment, she just stood there, a ghostly silhouette against the dark desert. Then, very slowly, she began to turn. As she faced me, she lifted her head, and for the first time, I saw her face. It was pale, shockingly so, with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to swallow the light. But it was her mouth that I'll never forget. It was open, contorted, in an expression of eternal, unbearable anguish. And then she screamed. It wasn't a human sound. It was a wail. A shriek that tore through the night, filled with centuries of pain, loss, and rage. It was a sound that didn't just pierce my ears. It went straight to my soul, chilling me to the very bone. And in that horrifying, soul-shattering cry, she screamed a name I hadn't heard since I was a child, a name whispered in scary stories to keep kids away from the water. La Llorona, the weeping woman, the legend my grandmother used to tell me about. The spirit of a mother who drowned her own children and is now cursed to wander the earth, forever weeping, forever searching for them. They say if you hear her cry, you're marked for misfortune. They say she's drawn to the water, forever reliving her crime. I scrambled back into my car, fumbling with the keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. I didn't look back. I stomped on the gas pedal and drove. I didn't slow down, didn't stop, until the first lights of the next town appeared on the horizon. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, the fluorescent lights feeling like a sanctuary. I sat there for an hour, just breathing, trying to get my heart rate back to normal. The wet spot on my back seat didn't dry for 3 days. I know what I saw that night on Route 66. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. I gave a ride to a ghost. I gave a ride to the weeping woman. So if you're ever driving through the New Mexico desert at night, and you see a woman in white by the side of the road, keep driving, lock your doors, and don't ever stop, because some legends are real, and some hitchhikers never want to reach their destination. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've had a similar encounter, or know a local legend you want to share, drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the road less traveled. Stay safe out there. Number 4. La Llorona in Griffith Park, Los Angeles, California. I went for a night hike in Griffith Park, and something followed me. You know LA has this reputation for being all glitz and glam, but if you've ever been to Griffith Park after dark, you know it's a different world. It's huge. Over 4,000 acres of wild, rugged land, right in the middle of the city. By day, it's full of tourists and families heading to the observatory. But at night, the shadows get long, the coyotes start howling, and every rustle in the bushes makes your heart jump. That's exactly the kind of thrill I was looking for. I'm a bit of an urban explorer, and I am fascinated by the history that is hidden just beneath the surface of our modern cities. Griffith Park is loaded with it. There's the old merry-go-round, the abandoned zoo, places that have seen decades of laughter, and maybe something darker. The park is named after Griffith J. Griffith, a man with a pretty dark past himself. He shot his wife in the face, she survived, amazingly, and he was known for his erratic behavior. So, the land itself seems to carry a certain weight, a certain energy. But the story I'm about to tell you isn't about him. It's about something much older. A legend that has haunted the Americas for centuries. It's the story of La Llorona, the weeping woman. They say she was a beautiful woman named Maria who, in a fit of rage and despair after her husband left her for someone younger, drowned her own children in a river. Realizing what she'd done, she drowned herself too. But she was denied entry into the afterlife, cursed to wander the earth for eternity, weeping and searching for the children she lost. Ere mournful cry, "Ay, mis hijos, oh my children," is said to be a death omen for anyone who hears it. Now, you hear stories about La Llorona all over, especially near bodies of water. But for some reason, her legend has attached itself firmly to Griffith Park, particularly near the Los Angeles River that snakes along its edge. People have reported seeing a spectral woman in white, hearing inconsolable sobbing when no one's around. I'd always dismissed these as just campfire stories, the kind of thing you tell to spook your friends. I was a skeptic. I believed there was a rational explanation for everything. That night, Griffith Park decided to prove me wrong. I decided to start my hike late, around 10 p.m. The main trails were empty, lit only by the distant glow of the city and a sliver of a moon. My goal was the old zoo, a spot I'd always found incredibly atmospheric. It was abandoned in the 1960s, and now it's just this collection of empty, graffiti-covered grottos and cages that once held bears, lions, and monkeys. During the day, it's a popular picnic spot. At night, it's downright creepy. The stone enclosures look like ancient ruins, and the silence is heavy. I had my headlamp on, its beam cutting a small circle of light into the oppressive darkness. I walked along the main path, past the empty caves where you could almost imagine the ghosts of long-dead animals pacing back and forth. The air was still and cool, and then I heard it. Faintly. At first, a sound like a woman crying. It was soft, a mournful, heartbreaking sob that seemed to be carried on the wind. I stopped, turned off my headlamp, and just listened. The sound grew louder, more desperate. It wasn't just sadness, there was agony in it. My first thought was that someone was hurt, maybe another hiker had fallen. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there? Do you need help?" The crying stopped. Dead silence. The kind of silence that makes the ringing in your ears feel deafening. I waited for a minute, then two. Nothing. I figured maybe it was just the wind, or an animal. I turned my headlamp back on and kept walking deeper into the zoo ruins. I reached a section with a row of smaller, rusted iron bar cages. These were the ones that really gave me the chills. They looked like something out of a medieval dungeon. And that's when the crying started again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right here, echoing through the cages. It was loud, raw, and full of so much pain it made the hair on my arms stand up. I swept my light across the enclosures, and my beam landed on a figure. Inside one of the cages, a woman was standing with her back to me. She was wearing a long, dirty white dress. Her hands were gripping the rusted bars. Her long black hair was soaking wet, dripping onto the dusty floor, even though it hadn't rained in weeks. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my urban explorer curiosity got the better of my fear. This had to be a prank. Some kids trying to scare people. I took a cautious step closer, trying to get a better look. "Hey," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted. "Are you okay?" She didn't move. The only sound was her ragged, weeping breaths and the slow drip, drip, drip of water from her hair. I took another step. That's when it happened. With a deafening clang that echoed through the entire zoo, the heavy iron door of the cage I was standing in front of slammed shut right behind me. I spun around, my light catching the thick, rusted lock that had somehow engaged itself. I was trapped. Panic set in. I grabbed the bars and shook them, but it was solid iron. It wasn't moving. My breathing became fast and shallow. And then, from the cage opposite me, came a slow, creaking sound. The woman was turning around. She lifted her head, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. Her face was a nightmare. Her hair fell away to reveal a gaunt, skeletal face with hollow, black eye sockets. There was nothing there. Just two dark, empty pits that seemed to suck all the light and hope out of the world. Her mouth was stretched wide in a silent, agonizing scream. For a moment that felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other, me, frozen in terror, and this embodiment of grief. And then, her voice erupted. It wasn't the sound of a human voice. It was a supernatural blast of sound that seemed to shake the very concrete beneath my feet. It was a deafening, soul-shattering shriek. "Donde están mis hijos? Where are my children?" The force of it threw me back against the bars of my cage. I scrambled for the lock, my fingers fumbling, my mind screaming. I don't know how, but I managed to get the latch open. It just clicked. I didn't wait to question it. I burst out of the cage and ran. I didn't look back. I just ran, blindly, stumbling over rocks and roots, my lungs burning. I didn't care about the trail. I just needed to get away from that sound, from those empty eyes. I finally crashed through some bushes and found the main path again. The lights of the parking lot were visible in the distance. Safety, I thought I was safe. I sprinted toward the exit, my feet pounding on the pavement. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing, just the dark, empty path behind me. Relief washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I was almost at my car, fumbling in my pocket for my keys. I could hear my own ragged breathing, the blood pounding in my ears. And then, I heard another sound. A soft, wet, dripping sound. Right behind me. I froze, my hand on the car door handle. Slowly, I turned my head. She was there. Not 20 feet away, not 10. She was standing directly behind me, so close I could have reached out and touched the soaking wet fabric of her dress. Her face was inches from mine, the same hollow eye sockets, the same silent scream. Her hand, pale and bony, reached out toward my face. I didn't scream. I couldn't. All the air left my body. I think I blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up in my car, the sun rising over the hills. The engine was off. The doors were locked. I don't know how I got in. I don't know what happened in those missing hours. I haven't been back to Griffith Park at night since. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I can still hear her. A faint, distant weeping on the wind. Some legends are just stories, but some are waiting in the dark for you to stop being a skeptic. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have your own chilling encounter you'd like to share, drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the unknown. Stay safe out there. Number 7. La Llorona, in the Mississippi Bayou, Biloxi, Mississippi. Have you ever been deep in the bayou at night? That feeling where the air gets heavy and every splash in the water sounds like something climbing out. The bayou cries back at night. And now I know why. It was a few years back, just outside Biloxi, Mississippi. My friends and I, always chasing a thrill, signed up for one of those late-night swamp tours. You know the kind, a flat-bottomed boat, a crusty old guide with a 1,000-yard stare, and the promise of seeing some alligators. The moon was just a sliver, and the cypress trees looked like skeletal fingers reaching down from the sky. The only light was the weak beam from the front of our boat, cutting through the fog that clung to the water's surface. For the first hour, it was exactly what you'd expect. The guide, a guy named Earl, pointed out glowing gator eyes in the distance and told us some local folklore. The drone of the engine was almost hypnotic, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. It was peaceful, in a spooky sort of way. We were just starting to relax, lulled by the rhythm of the boat gliding through the black water, when we heard it. Faint at first, a sound that didn't belong. It was a woman, sobbing. A deep, gut-wrenching cry that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. Bouncing off the cypress knees and through the Spanish moss, instantly, the atmosphere on the boat shifted. The easy chatter died. Everyone looked at each other, eyes wide. Was it part of the tour? Some kind of pre-recorded sound effect to scare the tourists. But the sound was too real, too full of genuine despair. Earl's face went pale under his weathered cap. He immediately cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of insects and that heartbreaking weeping. It was closer now. It sounded like a woman who had lost everything. Earl grabbed his big spotlight, his knuckles white, and slowly swept the beam across the water, probing the darkness between the trees. The light cut a sharp path, illuminating gnarled roots and curtains of moss. And then, it stopped. The beam landed on something in the water, maybe 30 feet from our boat. At first, it was just a dark shape. Then, a head slowly, impossibly, rose from the dark surface. Water streamed down a pale face, and long black hair clung to it like seaweed. Her eyes were just empty, hollowed-out pits of blackness that seemed to suck in the light. My blood ran cold. This wasn't part of any tour. This was wrong. The air grew impossibly cold, and I could see my breath misting in the spotlight's beam. She opened her mouth, but no scream came out. Instead, a whisper, a ghostly breath that carried across the water and right into our ears. My children, over and over, like a broken record of pure agony. That's when the boat started to rock. Not just a gentle sway, but violently, as if a massive creature was thrashing beneath us. People screamed. My friend grabbed my arm, his fingernails digging into my skin. Earl, our guide, seemed to snap out of his trance. He roared, his voice cracking with terror. "Don't look at her. Everyone, look down. Look at the floor of the boat. Now." His panic was more terrifying than the crying woman. He was a man who'd spent his entire life in these swamps, and he was petrified. Most people did as he said, huddling together. Some were praying, others were crying. But I couldn't help it. Morbid curiosity, stupidity, call it what you want. I had to look again. I risked a glance over the railing, and my heart stopped. She wasn't 30 feet away anymore. She was right there. Her face was inches from the side of the boat. Her empty eyes locked directly onto mine. Her skin was unnaturally white, almost glowing, and her features were twisted in eternal sorrow. One skeletal hand, with long, dirty fingernails, was slowly reaching up over the railing, dripping black water onto the deck. The whisper was no longer a distant echo. It was right in my ear. My children. It felt like she was asking me a question, pleading with me. She wasn't just crying for her lost children. La Llorona, the weeping woman, wanted someone to answer for them. She wanted a replacement. I scrambled back, falling over a cooler and landing hard on the deck. That's all I remember before Earl finally managed to get the engine roaring back to life. He cranked the throttle, and the boat shot forward, leaving the sobbing figure behind in our wake. No one spoke a word on the way back to the dock. The sound of her cries followed us for what felt like miles, eventually fading back into the normal sounds of the bayou. When we finally got back to solid ground, Earl just tied up the boat and walked away without a word, refusing to even take our money. He just shook his head and vanished into the night. We learned later he quit giving tours after that. They say La Llorona is a tale from the Southwest, a Hispanic legend. But legends travel. They follow the water. And that night, in a Mississippi bayou, I learned that some stories are true, and they don't care about maps or borders. The bayou has its own ghosts, and sometimes, they cry out for their children. Thanks for listening, and if you have your own local ghost story, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Stay safe out there. Have you ever heard a sound that freezes you in place? Not just from the cold, but from pure, primal fear. I have. It happened one late winter in South Lake Tahoe, a place known for its stunning beauty, but that night, it held something terrifying. The air was sharp, biting at any exposed skin, and the world was hushed under a blanket of snow. Lake Tahoe itself was a vast, frozen mirror under the moonlight. The ice so thick people were saying you could drive a truck across it. I was staying in a cabin not far from the shore, enjoying the quiet solitude. That's when I first heard it, a faint, mournful sound carried on the wind. It sounded like a woman weeping. My first thought was that someone was in trouble. Maybe they'd fallen or gotten lost. So, I grabbed my heaviest coat and a powerful flashlight and headed towards the sound, towards the edge of the lake. As I got closer, the crying grew louder, more desperate. It was a sound of profound grief, the kind that rips right through you. I stood at the shoreline, scanning the immense, empty expanse of ice with my flashlight beam. The moon was bright enough to see pretty far, and that's when I saw her. A figure, way out in the middle of the lake. But she wasn't standing. She was on her hands and knees, crawling. It was a slow, agonizing crawl. Her movements were jerky, trembling, as if every inch was a monumental effort. Behind her, a dark wet streak stained the pristine white ice, glistening in the moonlight. It looked like she was dragging herself out of a hole in the ice that I could unsee, leaving a trail of melted ice or water behind her. My heart started pounding in my chest. This wasn't someone who had slipped and fallen. This was something else entirely. I kept the flashlight beam trained on her, my hand shaking. Who would be out there, in the middle of a frozen lake, at this time of night, and crawling? My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe she was hypothermic, disoriented. I shouted out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" The only answer was the wind and her continuous, heartbreaking sobs. But then, she stopped. She slowly, deliberately, lifted her head. Even from that distance, I felt her gaze lock onto me, and then she screamed. It wasn't a scream for help. It was a wail of pure agony and rage that echoed across the entire valley. In that scream, I heard words, Spanish words I knew all too well from the stories my grandmother used to tell me to keep me away from the river at dusk. I, mis hijos. Oh, my children. The breath caught in my throat. La Llorona, the weeping woman. Here on a frozen lake. It didn't make sense, but the terror was undeniable. The sheer force of her scream seemed to vibrate through the ground, and a spiderweb of cracks shot out across the ice from where she knelt. The sound was deafening, a physical blow. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I was frozen in place, mesmerized by the horror. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But when my eyes opened, she was no longer in the middle of the lake. She was closer, at least 100 feet closer. She hadn't crawled that distance. She had just moved. The wet streak behind her was longer now, but she was still in the same crawling posture, her head down, sobbing. I couldn't breathe. My mind was short-circuiting. How did she move that fast? It was impossible. I squeezed my eyes shut tight, just for a second, praying that when I opened them, she would be gone. It was a foolish, childish impulse, but I was beyond rational thought. When I dared to look again, the foolishness of my action hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't 100 feet away. She was right there, right at the edge of the ice, where the frozen lake met the snowy shore, maybe 10 feet from where I was standing. Her long dark hair was matted and wet, plastered to a face I couldn't fully see, as it was still angled toward the ice. She was wearing a thin white gown that was soaked and clung to her gaunt frame, utterly inadequate for the freezing temperature. The wetness wasn't just from the lake. It was as if she was weeping from every pore of her body. The sound of her crying was no longer distant. It was right here, a gut-wrenching, intimate sound of eternal loss. I could see her shoulders shaking with each sob. The cold I'd felt earlier was nothing compared to the bone-deep chill that radiated from her. The air grew heavy, thick with sorrow, and something ancient and malevolent. She started to pull herself forward, her long, pale fingers clawing at the icy edge of the shore, digging into the snow. That's what finally broke my paralysis. I didn't wait to see her face. I didn't wait for her to get to her feet. I didn't wait for her to reach for me. I just turned and ran. I ran harder than I have ever run in my life. I didn't look back. I could hear her scream again, Miss Heel, but this time it was directly behind me, as if she was at my heels. I expected to feel an icy hand grab my shoulder at any second. I crashed through the trees, branches whipping at my face, not caring about the pain, only about putting distance between myself and the thing on the lake. I burst into my cabin, slammed the door, and locked every lock I could find. My body was trembling uncontrollably, and I collapsed against the door, gasping for air. For the rest of the night, I sat there in the dark, listening. The crying continued for hours, sometimes sounding far away, sometimes right outside my window. I didn't sleep, I just waited for the sun to rise. The next morning, in the bright, cheerful light of day, I forced myself to go back to the shore. I needed to know if it was real. Part of me hoped it was all a nightmare, a product of the isolation and the cold, but it wasn't. The cracks on the lake were there, spreading out from the center just as I'd seen. And leading from those cracks, all the way to the shoreline, was a long, dark, wet streak on the ice. A trail left by something that had crawled out of the frozen depths. The water cascades over the dam, creating a waterfall that flows into the creek below. It's a place of peace, of tranquility. Or so I thought. On that particular autumn afternoon, the park was bathed in that perfect golden light. The leaves were a kaleidoscope of red, orange, and yellow. When I got to the edge of the creek bank, my mind just couldn't process what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. There was nothing. No sign of the woman. No thrashing in the water. No struggle. Not even a body floating. The surface of the creek was calm, almost glassy, with just a few autumn leaves drifting on top. There were no ripples, no splash marks on the surrounding rocks. It was as if she had just vanished into thin air. I scrambled down the bank, my eyes scanning the water frantically. "Hello, are you okay?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The only reply was the echo of my own words bouncing off the rock formations. The peaceful woods suddenly felt menacing, and the silence was deafening. It was the sound of weeping, a woman's weeping, filled with an anguish so profound it felt like a physical weight in the air. The sound wasn't coming from the water. It was coming from right behind me. Every muscle in my body tensed. A cold dread, colder than the creek water, washed over me. I didn't want to turn around. Some primal instinct was screaming at me to run, to get out of there and never look back. But I couldn't. I was frozen to the spot. The crying grew louder, more desperate, and it was so close I could almost feel the vibrations of it in my chest. Slowly, so slowly, I forced myself to turn, and there she was, standing on the very same spot on the bridge where I had seen her just moments before. It was the same woman. The same long dark hair, the same flowing white dress. But this time, she was different. Her dress was soaked, clinging to her frame, and water dripped from the hem onto the stone bridge, yet it made no sound. Her face, which I hadn't seen before, was pale and gaunt. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits of despair, and she was looking right at me. Water streamed down her face. But it wasn't just water. It was mixed with tears. Her mouth opened, and a sound came out. Not a word, but a wail. A gut-wrenching, soul-crushing wail that seemed to tear through the fabric of the world. Then, she raised a long, bony finger and pointed directly at me. Her voice, when it came, was a raspy, ethereal whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Donde están mis hijas? Where are my children?" The Spanish words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. That's when I knew. This wasn't just some strange woman. This wasn't a prank. I was face to face with La Llorona, the weeping woman of legend. The ghost of a mother who drowned her children and is now cursed to search for them for all eternity, weeping and wailing by the water's edge. I didn't answer her. What could I say? My brain finally kicked back into gear, overriding the fear with a single powerful command: run. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I scrambled back up the bank, grabbed my backpack, and I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I didn't stick to the trail. I crashed through the underbrush, branches scratching at my face and arms, not caring about the pain. The only thing that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between myself and that bridge. Her wailing pursued me, echoing through the trees, a constant reminder of what I had seen. It felt like it was right behind me, no matter how fast I ran. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the woods and into the main parking area. I must have looked like a madman, covered in scratches, out of breath, my eyes wide with terror. A few people looked at me strangely, but I didn't care. I fumbled for my car keys, jumped in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, just trying to breathe. Even in the relative safety of my car, I could still hear her cries in my head. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me. Maybe my mind invented the whole thing. I've been over it 1,000 times myself, trying to find a rational explanation, but I can't. The image of her standing on that bridge, dripping wet, pointing at me. It's seared into my memory. The sound of her voice asking for her children. It haunts my dreams. After I got home, I started doing some research, and what I found was unsettling. While La Llorona is a legend deeply rooted in Hispanic culture, stories of a weeping woman by the water are not unique to Devil's Den, but many people have reported strange occurrences there. They talk about hearing disembodied crying near the creek, seeing strange figures in white, and feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and dread in that exact area. Some local legends even connect the park to the story of La Llorona, a tale that traveled north with migrant workers and took root in the local folklore. Was it just a story I'd heard and my mind filled in the blanks? I don't think so. What I saw felt too real, too visceral. I haven't been back to Devil's Den since that day. As beautiful as it is, I can't bring myself to walk those trails again. The memory is just too strong. Some places hold on to things, onto emotions, onto tragedy, and I believe the area around that old stone bridge in Devil's Den holds the sorrow of the weeping woman. So, if you ever find yourself hiking in that beautiful Arkansas park, and you hear the sound of a woman crying by the water, don't go looking for her. Just turn around and walk away. Trust me. Have you ever had a similar experience, either at Devil's Den or somewhere else? Have you ever encountered something you just can't explain? I'd genuinely love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sharing these experiences helps us feel a little less alone in the face of the unknown. Thanks for letting me share my story with you. If you found this chilling, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true paranormal encounters. Stay safe out there. Number 9. La Llorona in the Las Vegas Wash, Nevada. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're re-diving into a story that proves what happens in Vegas. Does UNT always stay in Vegas? Especially when it comes to the supernatural. You go to Las Vegas expecting illusions, right? Magic shows, dazzling lights, the whole 9 yards. But what I'm about to tell you wasn't part of any act. It was real, it was terrifying, and it happened in a place you'd least expect it. The Las Vegas Wash. For those of you who don't know, the Las Vegas Wash isn't a glamorous part of the city. It's a 12-mile-long channel, mostly concrete, that funnels the city's excess water, treated wastewater, and storm runoff into Lake Mead. It's a stark, almost industrial-looking landscape, cutting through the desert. It's not exactly the Bellagio fountains. There are walking and jogging trails alongside parts of it, which is where this story begins. I was out for a late afternoon jog along the trail near Tropicana Avenue. The sun was starting to set, casting long, strange shadows across the concrete and the sparse desert vegetation. It was that time of day when the world gets quiet, the heat finally breaks, and you feel like you have the whole city to yourself. I was just getting into my rhythm, enjoying the peace, when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It was the sound of someone crying, not just soft sobbing, but a deep, gut-wrenching wail full of despair. It seemed to be coming from down inside the concrete channel itself. I slowed down, pulled out my earbuds, and looked over the edge. The water level was low, just a shallow stream trickling through the center of the vast channel, and that's when I saw her. Standing in the shallow water was a woman. She was tall, unnaturally so, and dressed entirely in a long, flowing white gown. The fabric was soaked and clung to her thin frame, but it looked strangely pristine, not muddied by the murky water. Her long black hair was plastered to her back and face. She had her back to me, and she was dragging the fingers of one hand through the water as she walked slowly, her movements unnervingly graceful. The most unsettling thing, though, was the sound her footsteps made. Instead of a splash, each step echoed against the concrete walls with a sharp, metallic clang, like someone striking a pipe with a hammer. Clang, clang. The sound was so out of place it made the hairs on my arms stand up. The crying was constant, a heartbreaking sound that seemed to echo from a place of infinite sadness. I felt a strange mix of fear and pity. My first thought was that this was a person in serious distress. I called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She stopped walking. The metallic clang ceased. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still, only the sound of her weeping cutting through the evening air. Then, slowly, she turned. Her face, it's a sight I will never forget. It was bone pale, almost luminous in the fading light. Her eyes were dark, cavernous pits, and black streaks, like mascara mixed with tears, ran down her cheeks. But it wasn't makeup. It looked like the streaks were etched into her very skin. Her lips were blue and trembling as she looked up at me, her gaze piercing right through me. She didn't shout, she didn't scream, she whispered, and somehow the whisper carried all the way up to me, clear as a bell. "I miss heroes. Help me find them." Her voice was like the rustling of dry leaves, ancient and filled with a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight. The moment she said "Miss Hijos," my children, a chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. I knew the legend. La Llorona, the weeping woman. The ghost of a mother who drowned her children and is now cursed to search for them for eternity, weeping by the water's edge. I'd heard the stories growing up, but they were just that stories, campfire tales. Not something you encounter on a jog in urban Las Vegas. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I took a single step back from the edge of the overlook. Just one. I didn't even turn around. My eyes were locked on her. In the split second it took for my foot to land on the pavement behind me, she vanished from the channel below. There was no sound, no splash, no fade. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone. The channel was empty. My heart was pounding in my chest. I scanned the area, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then, I felt a cold spot in the air right in front of me. I looked up. There on the pedestrian walkway that arched over the wash about 20 feet ahead of me, she was standing. She hadn't run. She hadn't climbed. It was as if she had simply willed herself into existence on that bridge. She was standing perfectly still, looking right at me, her white dress fluttering in a breeze I couldn't feel. Her face was still streaked with those black tears. But now, her expression wasn't sorrowful. It was empty. Blank. That was it for me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and sprinted. I ran faster than I think I've ever run in my life, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was in the brightly lit parking lot, surrounded by the familiar sounds of city traffic. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like jelly. I fumbled for my car keys, got in, and locked the doors. I sat there for a long time, just trying to get my breathing under control, replaying the encounter over and over in my head. The crying, the metallic footsteps, her face, her voice, and the instantaneous, silent teleportation. It couldn't be real, but it was. A few days later, after I'd calmed down enough to think straight, I got curious. I started asking around, talking to some Las Vegas old. I went to a local diner, the kind of place that's been around for decades, and described what I saw to the bartender, trying to sound casual, like I was just sharing a weird story. He just polished a glass and nodded slowly, not looking surprised at all. "Ah, yeah," he said, his voice low. "You saw her, La Llorona." He told me that she's a known fixture of the Las Vegas wash, but she's not always there. She shows up after the flash floods, he explained. When the water runs high and fast, the big storms wash things down into the channel. People say it stirs her up, reminds her of what she lost. He said others have seen her too, walking the concrete banks or even wading in the floodwaters. Some have heard her cries carried on the wind all the way to the nearby neighborhoods. She's considered a local omen, a tragic, terrifying part of the desert landscape that exists just beyond the neon glow. So, when you think of Las Vegas, think of this. Beyond the glitz and the glamour, in the stark, concrete arteries that drain the city, something ancient and sorrowful still walks. She's looking for her children in the runoff of the city of sin. I expected to see illusions in Vegas, but I never expected to see a legend come to life. And I can tell you this, I will never jog along the Las Vegas wash again. What do you guys think? Have any of you had a similar experience in an urban setting? Let me know your own hometown ghost stories in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Number 10. La Llorona on Pine Ridge Road, Fort Collins, Colorado. My dashcam caught her body perfectly, but not her face. It was a detail that would haunt me for the rest of my life. A digital ghost in my own machine. This happened a few years back, just outside Fort Collins, Colorado. I was driving down Pine Ridge Road, a stretch of pavement that cuts through some genuinely beautiful, but deeply isolated, country. It was late, probably pushing midnight. The road was empty, the trees on either side forming a dark tunnel under the moonlight. The only sounds were the hum of my engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. I came around a sharp bend where the road dips down and runs alongside a small, gurgling creek. And that's when I saw her. A woman, dressed in what looked like a long, flowing white dress, was kneeling by the water's edge. My first thought wasn't paranormal. It was concern. Was she hurt? Had her car broken down? I'm not the kind of person to just drive by, so I eased my foot off the gas, my car slowing to a crawl. I rolled down my passenger side window, ready to call out, to ask if she needed a hand. "Hey, are you all right?" I started to say, but the words caught in my throat. As my headlights fully illuminated her, she slowly, deliberately, lifted her head. I couldn't make out her features from that distance, just a dark shape where her face should be. And then, she moved. It wasn't a normal movement. She didn't stand up like a person would. She launched herself towards my car with terrifying speed. Her feet didn't seem to touch the ground. She just glided over the rough terrain, a silent white blur closing the distance in a heartbeat. Her arms were outstretched, reaching for me, for my car. Panic, pure and absolute, took over. I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The engine screamed in protest, tires spinning on the loose gravel for a second before they caught, and the car shot forward. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I just drove. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break free. I didn't slow down until the first streetlights of Fort Collins appeared, bathing the road in a comforting, artificial orange glow. I pulled over, my hand shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, just trying to breathe, trying to convince myself I hadn't just lost my mind. Then, I remembered the dashcam. It was always running. A cold dread, mixed with a desperate need for validation, washed over me. I had to see it. I had to know if what I saw was real. Back in the safety of my apartment, I plugged the SD card into my computer. My hands were still trembling as I navigated to the file. There it was. The footage was crystal clear. The dark road, the bend, the creek, and there she was, the woman in the white dress, kneeling by the water. I watched as my car slowed down. I watched as she lifted her head, and then I saw it as she rushed towards the camera. Her body, the white dress, her outstretched arms, they were all there, perfectly captured in high definition. But her face was just a blur of digital noise. It was like a corrupted file, a glitchy, pixelated mess of static right where her face should have been. It was utterly unnatural. The rest of the image was perfect, but her face was a void. The next morning, I couldn't shake it. I needed answers. I drove to the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. I felt like an idiot trying to explain it, but I had to. I showed the deputy the footage on my laptop. He watched it, his expression unreadable. He played it back a few times, zooming in on the static-filled face. I expected him to laugh, to tell me it was a prank or a technical glitch, but he didn't. He just leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. He looked at me, his eyes tired, and said something I'll never forget. "Son," he said, "you're not the first person to come in here talking about the woman on Pine Ridge. You're not the first to meet La Llorona out there." He didn't offer any more explanation, and I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The name was enough. The Weeping Woman. I'd heard the legends my whole life. Stories told to scare kids. A woman who drowned her children and is now cursed to search for them for eternity, weeping by the water's edge. I always thought it was just a story. But the legends never mentioned her face being a glitch in reality. The deputy's weary acceptance was more terrifying than any ghost story. It was confirmation. What I saw was real, and it was known. I've driven through Fort Collins many times since then, but I've never taken Pine Ridge Road again, not even in broad daylight. I still have the video file, saved on a dozen different hard drives. Sometimes, when I'm feeling brave, or maybe just stupid, I watch it. I watch her glide towards my car, a ghostly figure in the night, and I stare at that block of static where her face should be, wondering what horrors it conceals. I wonder if it's a mercy that the camera couldn't capture it. Maybe some things are too terrible for even a machine to see. The sheriff's words echo in my mind every time. You're not the first, and I know, with a chilling certainty, that I won't be the last. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely road near Fort Collins, by a quiet creek in the dead of night, and you see a woman in white, don't stop, just drive. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've had a similar encounter or know anything more about the Pine Ridge Llorona, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true scary stories. Stay safe out there.